Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser, and really excited to be with you on this Thursday as we count down to the opening of training camp for the Seahawks, as well as a bunch of other teams in the NFL. And today we got a special show. If you know anything about the NFL and you love football, you've probably by now discovered Bootleg Football, and it's a great series. And I'll admit something: I hadn't really discovered it until last year, and once I did, I fell in love. Love what they do over there. And today we get to talk to EJ Snyder, one half of the Bootleg Football team, about what's going on in the NFL, the NFC West, and with the Seahawks. EJ, man, it's so good to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. We were just talking about this before we started recording, but we live in the same area. The Seahawks are my local backyard team. Been doing football, both of us, for a while now. We know a lot of the same people. We've worked with a lot of the same people, but we've never had a chance to make this connection. So I'm pretty excited about it because the Seahawks are an exciting team. And like you said, hope springs eternal. First couple days of, organized training camp, everybody's excited. Every fan in the NFL is pumped up right now. It's a great time.
Well, I want to get into a lot of this football stuff, which we certainly will. But I've seen you on some other shows. I don't know that I know your background that well. I thought other people might be interested in finding out, like, where'd you grow up? Who was your team growing up? How did that all start?
Yeah, that's a strange one for me. So I'm a Bears fan. A lot of people that follow me know that. And so they assume that I lived in Chicago. I've actually never lived in Chicago ever. I've been to Chicago a lot, but it's not a place I was from. I grew up in upstate New York. So I was right sort of in the middle of the southern part of the state, which is equidistant from the Bills, the Giants, and the Jets. So I had sort of all my choices of the New York teams. My dad's entire side of the family's from Buffalo, so there's definitely a bit of a pull for the Bills there, but I grew up with the Parcells Giants. They were a tremendous team. Certainly grew up amongst a lot of suffering Jets fans who are still suffering Jets fans, but maybe that turns around for them. And, you get to be 10, 11 years old and everybody's kind of dividing sides. And I saw Walter Payton play and I was like, that's it. The history, the uniforms, and really just Walter Payton got me into football. And I was always a football fan from then on. And I was a Bears fan from then on. And that's been, they won the Super Bowl 2 years later. I was like, hey, this is easy. No problem. We're going to do this a bunch. Yeah. Hasn't been that ride, but and I was just a fan for a long time, all through high school and college. I didn't do anything with football. I was never a coach. I almost walked onto my college team because they needed tall receivers, but that didn't happen. So I really didn't have a sort of football background. And I got into doing some media stuff in other areas. Later in my life, I started writing and did that. And my sort of passion for football grew. Like, I got more and more curious and I realized how much I didn't know about the game. And I wanted to answer some of those questions. And the way I started doing that was really a fascination with the NFL draft, because like the NFL draft builds the league. And if I know all the players who come out in the draft, I'll have a pretty good basis for like the raw material that's making up the NFL. And so I started following the draft really closely. And, I think everybody has opinions about all that stuff, but I didn't want to have opinions. I wanted to have informed opinions. So I started reaching out to people, and I did it very quietly. I didn't publish anything. I didn't share anything with anybody, any lists or rankings or anything. I was very self-conscious about all that and very unsure because I just didn't feel like I knew enough yet. And I did that for 4 or 5 years pretty intensively on my own before I ever shared anything. And then I wrote a fan post on SB Nation, like a lot of folks did, for the Bears. It was about building perfect defense back in the day. And it got, I was so nervous. I remember, this as a creator, when you put something out in the world, man, the first time you're like, oh, I have no idea how this is going to go. It went really well. There was a lot of good feedback, and I thought that was kind of the end of it. Turns out that was just the beginning of it. About 6 months later, there was a call for new content creators on Windy City Gridiron, which is the site on SB Nation that covers the Bears. And I pitched the then editor an idea for a draft column, and he rang me back like 3 months later and said, hey, can you do that? Can you start next week? And I was like, yeah, I guess. And I started writing about the draft at that point, then somewhat professionally, or certainly with the platform. And it just grew from there. I did that for 3 or 4 years, started a Bears podcast. That was my first podcast. And then about a year and a half after that, I met Brett Coleman at the Senior Bowl, and we sat and talked football for a long time, realized we had a lot more to say about it, and we started Bootleg Football.
What year was that?
2020.
2020. So it is pretty recent.
It was literally people came home from that Senior Bowl with the flu. They were sick. And we were like, wow, that's weird. Like 4 or 5 people got really sick. And then 2 weeks later, I told Brett, like, hey, don't say you want to start a podcast. I'll be at your house in 2 weeks and we're going to like mock this thing up and make it work. I'm not just going to sit on this. And he said, okay. And I flew to his house like 2 weeks after the Senior Bowl. And I remember flying home from Long Beach, and we came up with the name. And then, we even did some testers around his kitchen table, and everybody was wearing masks in Long Beach. And I was like, I got to figure out what this COVID thing is. And it was not even 2 weeks later, pretty much the world shut down. And that was interesting. It was an interesting time to start a podcast. There are some definite benefits, but obviously a lot of restrictions as well.
Well, it's fascinating that you guys met at the Senior Bowl. I went to the Senior Bowl for the first time this past year, and love the experience. Not the easiest place to get to from Seattle, I'll tell you that much. But I got sick as a dog coming back, but it wasn't COVID. Anyway, had you guys known each other before there? So you just happened to sit next to each other? Or
no, that's really funny because I had never gone to any NFL events at that. I mean, I've been to games, of course, but as a media member, I'd never been. And I had tried several years before. And because I, in those days didn't work for a newspaper or radio station, I didn't have call sign letters behind my name. They were just like, no, you're just some random. And then that year, 2020, my editor, who had changed at the time at Windy City Gridiron, Lester Wilfong, who I am eternally grateful to. Lester has been a major force in me being anywhere that I am today. He gave me many opportunities, and this was one of them. He called me up. I remember I was at work, and he said, hey, do you want to go to the Senior Bowl? And of course, any draft guy ever is always like, yeah, it's the golden ticket. I absolutely want to go to the Senior Bowl. He said, we can't pay for anything. You'd have to pay your own way, but you'd have full access. And I was, heck yes. He said, you don't want to talk to your wife? I said, no, I'm telling her I'm going. She'll understand. I've been doing this for long enough now. And that was really the opportunity. And then I got kind of nervous about it because I'd never been to an all-star game. I'd never been to Mobile. And so I just reached out on Twitter and said, hey, I'm going to the Senior Bowl for the first time. I knew some people by then. Who else is going? So I can kind of set my agenda. And Brett was one of the guys that replied. And it's really funny. I've told this story a lot. Lots of my friends were like, oh my God, Brett Coleman replied to you. And I was like, who's Brett Coleman? Like, I hadn't watched any of his videos at that point. He knows this. And it was probably helpful because I just went into it like, hey, here's another football guy that wants to talk football. And it was his first year as well, going to the Senior Bowl. And so I got in the day before he did. And when he landed, which was the middle of the day on the first day when the evening press conference is, he said, hey, I'm here. Are you hungry? And I said, yeah. We went and shared a plate of barbecue in an empty restaurant. And we sat there for like 3.5 hours talking football. And they were like, oh, crap, we got to go. Like the press conference is starting in like 20 minutes. And we did the press conference together. And then he just basically said, all right, tomorrow's, they did weigh-ins publicly back in those days. And he was like, I'll just meet you at weigh-ins, right? And I was like, sure, I guess. And we were pretty much inseparable for the rest of the week. We sat in the bleachers together, we watched practices together. And by Thursday, he just said, we're going to do this. And I said, we're going to do what? He said, start a podcast, because he didn't have a podcast at the time. He was a video guy. I was an audio guy. And he said, I think this is going to work. I think we have more things to say about football. And I was like, all right, like I'm going to be at your house in 2 weeks and we're going to build this thing. So no, I did not know him. That probably helped in retrospect. He already had a pretty high profile in the NFL by then. And I just went into it sort of like, hey, this is just another football guy. And a lot of my friends were freaking out about that. And I was like, why is everybody freaking out? Now I know.
So is this your full-time gig now?
It is my full-time gig. I've been doing this for a little over 2 years as my full-time gig. So I am obviously co-founder, co-creator, co-host. I do a lot of the writing, and then I also run the business side of Bootleg Football. So this is weird, but Washington State, the state we're in, makes you pick a job code. And we were setting up payroll and stuff, and I was like, I don't know what my job code is. So I said to the person doing my stuff, send them to me. And I was looking and I was like, well, I do that. I do that. I do that. And I was like, well, I don't know. And I jokingly said to her, like, I guess CEO, because I do all that stuff. And she's like, okay. I was like, what do you mean, okay? And she's like, it's just a number code. I don't care, And I was like, oh, okay. I guess I'm the CEO of Bootleg Football, which I never say because it feels a little bit embarrassing, but I do run all the business side, sponsorship side, and everything else. So it's a job and a half, but I love it. And yeah, I've been dedicated to this for a couple of years now, and it is both the coolest job I've ever had. It is also easily the weirdest job I've ever had.
Well, congrats on that, man. As someone who just made the leap last year, really
congrats to you as well. It is a heck of a leap.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see the people kind of go through that process, and it's a different life, and
very
and kind of surreal. So anyway, I love hearing that background from you. How'd you end up in Seattle?
Oh, it's a good question. I lived here for 3 years as a kid, third, fourth, and fifth grade. We came out to live with family. We actually lived the first year or so with my great grandmother. I was about 20 blocks away from Husky Stadium in those days. We used to ride our bikes down, and they just had like a snow fence, and we would watch like Don James run practice on what is now like all the softball fields. So that was my first like up close, big time sort of D1 football experience, watching those guys over the fence. And Don James, of course, was a legend at UW, but ended up moving back to the same town in New York and finishing high school there. And then when I had a choice for college, I applied to 3 or 4 schools on the East Coast and 3 schools on the West Coast. And I got accepted at a bunch of them. And I just decided I want to go to the West Coast. I want to go away from where I went to high school. I want to go sort of what I thought was back to, but it was really coming to the region in a completely new way. I was living in a different city. And while I was familiar, which helped, it was a new experience. And I've been here ever since.
Well, it is going to be a total coup in the chat if I don't get us to football soon. So
Yep.
I personally love hearing the backstory, and everyone seems to be loving hearing your backstory, because I don't think a lot of people spend time getting to know the people that are talking to them. So I appreciate you spending some time with me on that. I'm talking to EJ Snyder of Bootleg Football, and you guys are doing your summer preview series. And I think it's great. As someone who needs content to go when I'm walking my dog, when I'm in the car, you guys give just terrific content out there, and you go deep. And one of the things I really appreciate about what you guys do, and when I look for content that I'm going to consume, is that it's not just regurgitated. It's not just superficial. It is you guys give an honest, deep review of each team from a essentially objective perspective, and usually bring an insight that maybe I didn't know or didn't know about. You get into the coaching, the schemes, all that stuff. So if people have not checked it out, they absolutely should. It's a fantastic series. Great way to spend some of your summer time. And before we get to the Seahawks, I got to ask you about some of these other NFC West teams, because I'm going to give you a few things here about Matt Stafford. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk about the Rams for a second. Matt Stafford last year, he had his lowest touchdown passing percentage since he's been with the Rams. All right. Matt Stafford last year had the most games in his career, 6, with 0 passing touchdowns. Matt Stafford ranked 15th in EPA per play. Actually, it was 16th in EPA. I think it's 15th in adjusted. He ranked, let's see, in Field Vision Pro, which is Cody Alexander does his threat rating, 25th ranked quarterback.
Yep.
I go on and on and on. He's 37 years old. He's not getting any younger. And I look at the kind of, if I go over his past few seasons, his first season with the Rams, he had a 6.8% touchdown rate, which was his best of his career. Then he goes down to 3.3, then bumps back up to 4.6, and then drops back down to 3.9 last year. The only number I can find with Matt Stafford that is improved is that his interception rate was down last year. So why is it that everybody is very comfortable saying he's the best quarterback in the division, the Rams are the team to beat, and don't really spend any time wondering if this guy is maybe at the tail end of his career.
Yeah, I love that you bring this up as an example. This is right up my alley because Matt Stafford, of course, famously was drafted by Detroit and played there for a long time. As a Bears fan, I have lots of PTSD about Matt Stafford, and most of it is well deserved. He is a tremendous quarterback, and this is a perfect kind of in a nutshell example of what we do at Bootleg. And you can look at Matt's numbers, not in a vacuum, but largely in the context of what the Rams were last year. And the Rams are one of the most fascinating teams. We've already covered them. We've gone through the NFC West. Of course, we put out our Seahawks episode as well. But in the Rams episode, we talk about the fact that the Rams were an absolute dumpster fire for the first 6 to 7 weeks of last year. They were so bad that even though they played great down the stretch, end up taking the division by the skin of their teeth at the end of the year, they played so well that they only pulled their ranks up to median at best. And you mentioned it, 15th or 16th, threat rating at 25th. And if you really look at Matt Stafford, it was kind of a tale of two seasons. Again, he tailed off a little bit at the end of the year, but if you're looking at, let's just say, passer rating, which is not a perfect stat by any stretch, but it gives you a reasonable estimation. So, if you look at the first 7 weeks, he has 1 week against San Francisco over 100, and the rest of the weeks are not great. Then he has, the first little blip is week 7. He has a 124.5 rating when they're playing Minnesota. And again, tough team, tough defense, but he knows it really well. And the Rams are starting to get their act together right at that point. It's like you can put a pin at that point in the season between week 6 and week 7. And Sean McVay really rallies the troops and says, okay, we've all collectively, offense and defense, have been playing terribly, and we've lost most of these games. Like the majority of their losses are in those first 7 weeks. And then they flip a switch and they start winning football games. They are completely different, and their rating starts to reflect that. Not in the first couple of weeks, it sputters 83, 77. Then we go 142, 104, 110, 132. And you're like, all right, they've hit their groove and they're beating quality opponents and they're doing it regularly. But even with that late season surge and that sort of return to what Sean McVay certainly imagined at the beginning of the season, through all the injuries, or a lot of injuries, which contributed to that early slump, but they just came out incredibly slow. And most people who aren't Rams fans looked at that team once or twice in the first month and went, they're not going to challenge anybody. They're not winning anything this year. They're done. They're going to have to retool again. Stafford's done. I can't tell you how many times I've told other people, hey, I think this is the year that Stafford falls off. Do you know when I started saying that? It was 6 years ago. I was like, the injuries have piled up. Like, it's got to be soon, right? He's taken so many hits. He is a warrior back there. But with most people, most quarterbacks, you would see diminishing physical skills. He's very dangerous in the fact that he's seen it all, done it all. He's very difficult to confuse. If you surround him with good weapons, he can still create those performances that we saw in the middle of the season that really elevated the Rams and propped them up and eventually had them winning the division. So I think some of why people aren't talking about that right now is recency bias, because it wasn't flipped. They didn't start off super hot and fade. I'll call it the a la Derek Carr. Like Derek Carr had so many years where he started off in the first 8 games, we thought he was an all-pro, and then they just faded down the stretch. This is the bizarro version of that, the reverse version of that. And everybody saw them finish strong. Really, I'll say steal the division, because I feel like they did. They earned it, but they pipped the Hawks at the wire. Everybody knows that on this show for sure. And then you add somebody like Devontae Adams, who's in the exact same category of where he is in his career as Matt Stafford, wily veteran, somewhat diminished physical skills, but not diminished all the way. He is not done. And that pairing, I think, is going to be very dangerous. Puka, again, as long as he can stay healthy, is a threat. And McVay, like it or not, he's one of the best coaches in the NFL. He is such a great football coach. And so people look at it and they go, Matt Stafford might not be straight up top 8, top 10 like he used to be, and he was for a very long time. He might be in that sort of middle muddle of quarterbacks that are 16 or better. The Rams can win with that, and that's why I think everybody looks and goes, well, last year was really goofy, but I certainly am not tabbing the Rams for a repeat of that, because I would be very surprised if they had that slow of a start.
Well, one of the things, EJ, that's interesting there is, I'm wondering if it gives you any pause. You talk about the last part of the season. Some of the games that you're talking about are against the Patriots, where he had
Mhm.
4 touchdowns, against the Saints, where he
Yep.
had 2 touchdowns, against the Jets, which honestly, he didn't have that great of a game.
It would, yeah, that's the one that I look at is like he played the Jets and he didn't play that well. Yeah,
And he played the
there are moments.
Cardinals in a game they needed and didn't
Mhm.
play that well. And even earlier against the Seahawks, they had 7 3-and-outs. He had 200 yards in
Mhm.
regulation. They had 13 points on offense. It was actually the second time in Sean McVay's career that an offense he ran had 7 3-or-outs, 3-and-outs
Mhm.
or more in one game. Is there a little bit of potentially fool's gold in that finishing flourish?
There is some, but I think it's only if you think that Matt Stafford is to use an analogy from Daniel Jeremiah, the truck, not the trailer. And throughout a lot of his career, Matt Stafford could be the truck, the player that was pulling that team, that offense along. If you still believe he's that guy and is going to be that guy, and you're relying on him to do that week to week, you're probably going to be disappointed because he's going to hit that some weeks, but he's definitely not going to hit that all weeks anymore. So if you go in thinking he's the truck, yeah, there's probably fool's gold there. And some Rams fans absolutely are. And that's fine. fans, as we know, cover the entire spectrum of, just straight up, if they, in the Rams case, wear blue and gold, they're amazing, and then other people are much more critical. If you go in saying he can still contribute and he is still a guy that can get it done if you surround him with enough weapons, and they do have a very good offensive line in front of him, which is critical at this point of his career because he has taken so much punishment that, he could be, just like any quarterback, a hit away. But I've said that about Stafford forever. And he always gets up through pretty much everything, including stuff like a broken back, which is just
Yeah.
bananas. Um, but, if you think he's still the shining star that's going to pull that cart, you're going to be a little bit disappointed. If you go, he is a wily veteran that can hurt you on any given week. He's not going to do it every week, but you better not get him on the week where he's going off. I think you're going to have a more realistic view, and I think you probably won't be disappointed. You're going to get that.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because I think teams tell on themselves with the actions they do, regardless of what they say. And for the last few years, every year they go into the offseason not sure whether they're going to agree with Matt Stafford on his value and whether he's going to come back. And this season was no exception. He did come back. We'll find out if this is the last year that happens. We're talking to EJ Snyder of Bootleg Football. One of the things you mentioned there is their offensive line, and it feels like another not very told story around the Rams is Alaric Jackson has a blood clot issue, which is, we don't know how serious, but those things have been potentially serious. We saw how that affected, the Patriots last year and losing a key player
Mhm.
for a season. If Alaric Jackson goes down, Rob Havenstein, by the way, has had surgery on both shoulders this offseason.
Mhm.
You're talking about like DJ Humphries potentially stepping in there at left tackle. Steve Avila has been okay, but not great. Is there a chance here if Alaric Jackson's down for the season? How much do you think that would affect your opinion of this Rams team?
A lot. I think anytime you have a high level starting tackle, I'm just going to say tackle, not left tackle or right tackle, because everybody has to pass protect anymore. Anytime, and we see this, we saw it with the Vikings last year when Darisaw went down there. Completely different team before Christian Darisaw went down and after, like completely. You look at their pressure rates, you look at how they ran their offense. They continued to be successful, but they were a very, very different team. And it was all based off the Darisaw injury. And anytime an NFL team loses a high level starter at tackle, it's very difficult. There aren't enough tackles in the NFL. There just aren't. And if you have a just decent starter capable, and I mean just capable, middle of the pack, not getting your quarterback killed, third tackle, you're among the haves in the NFL, not the have-nots. So it would definitely affect their line. And there are always questions with, I think, linemen in particular, because it is a high wear position. You mentioned the Patriots, Barmore, like their defense was completely different without him in there. And
Mhm.
they did a lot of things to make sure if that happened again, that they wouldn't be as over a barrel, but they certainly were last season. And I think any team is, when you lose a high level starter on the line, offense or defense, it's very, very different. And, you've seen it with the Hawks on their defensive line, right? Defensive stalwarts go down. They have to kind of tape it together for a few weeks and just hope they can get a pass rush in another way. They can't just go, okay, it's third down, like Leonard, go get him, or Byron, go get him. And it's the same with the Rams. Yes, if you are saying one of their tackles is going to miss even significant number of games, forget the whole season, 6 or 8 games, that's a lot. Again, the NFL is very concentrated. There's 17, soon to be 18 games, it feels like, and that's not a lot compared to basketball or baseball or hockey or anything else. Like, everyone matters, and if you lose a key starter for half of those, yeah, it's gonna change what they do. Does it mean they can't win? No, but are they gonna have to win differently? Yeah, you can't just put Alaric Jackson over there and say that's your guy, no help, and now I've got all my other chess pieces on the board to use as I want. You're probably gonna have to commit tight ends and running backs and pass protection. You're probably not going to run to that side as often. You might, depending on who the replacement is, but you will have to change things. And yeah, it would be a downgrade. Alaric Jackson, I think, is an underrated tackle. Not a lot of people bring his name up. He plays very well when he's in there, and he plays specifically within the Rams system very, very well. So if he went down, he's not really a replaceable piece to the same level.
Yeah. Well, we won't get into the Rams defense as much, but I will share for people that hadn't seen it, when I went through and looked at the Rams and the Seahawks and some of the trends there. The Rams played the second most dime defense. Over 25% of their snaps last year were dime defense. They managed to get their pressure rate was almost 50% when they were in dime. Yep. But their pressure rate, it was like the second best pressure rate when they went into nickel or base. They actually had one of the lower pressure rates in the NFL. Yep. So I'm really curious about how that defense, I think Poona Ford's a good addition there. We'll see how that helps them out. But there's real questions at the second level, as there have been last year. And there's real questions at the cornerback and at position as well. So there's a lot more question marks than I think people realize. Jared Verse is a astronomical player. We loved him in the draft, love him here. So no doubts there. Before we get to the Seahawks, I want to talk about the 49ers as another NFC West team. And I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot, EJ. I don't expect you to know the answer. I didn't know this answer before this morning. Robert Saleh's back with the 49ers after what I perceive to be a very successful, tenure with the 49ers, initially with Kyle Shanahan. Obviously, they made the Super Bowl when he was there. If I asked you how many of the years, the 4 years he was with the 49ers as the defense coordinator, how many of the 4 years did they rank in the top 10 in points allowed when he was the defense?
Oh, in points?
Points allowed.
Oh, in top 10? I don't know that they did.
Well, that's an interesting guess. So they did it once. They were 8th ranked in points allowed in 2020.
Yeah.
But if I asked you, where did they rank? 2019. Where did they rank in the other 3 seasons? Would you be surprised to know that they were 17th, 28th, and 25th in his other 3 seasons?
The 28th and 25th, 28th especially, that was not a particularly great year. 17th, I'm okay with. Like, as a scoring defense, if you are top half or better, and 17th is right there, it's on the line. Obviously, 16th would be top half, but you can deal with that depending on who your offense is. And if Kyle Shanahan is there and you have your weapons and the offenses were working as they were in those days, you can get away with that and win a lot of games. And they did. You don't always need a top 10 scoring defense. You can't obviously have that. 2/3 of the league doesn't. There are other ways to win. I think what Saleh brought the 49ers more than scoring was the incredible consistency of bend but don't break. And, they did give up points. They would give up field goals, but they would make you earn it. They gave up very few busts. They had their explosive play rate in those years was really low. They did give them up, but he was very consistent. And Shanahan was like, if I have that consistency and I know what I'm getting, they're going to score roughly this many points. It's going to take them roughly this long to do that. I can out scheme them on the other side and win. And he did. And then last year, he lost a lot of that consistency. Saleh wasn't there. They had a new DC. It did not work well. They did have busts. They did give up explosive plays, and the offense did not, operated at the same or a slightly lower level. And those 2 sliders, again, went like this. And you can't have that in the NFL because the margins are very slim. All the teams are very close. NFL loves parity, and it's great for the sport. But their sliders slipped badly last year, and it wasn't as big a slip as you might think, again, given those previous rankings of 25th or 28th in scoring defense. But what they did do is they had a very different tenor, right? They would give up big chunks. It was unpredictable. And you can see, you said teams tell on themselves by what they do. Yeah, they said, nope, we're not doing that. We can't do that. We can't win with that. We're not built like that. And they weren't. They don't pay on defense like that. And they went back to a known. We will see if he's able to return, because that's one of the other great myths in the NFL as well. It was good before, so it'll be good again. Every team's different every year. He has different experiences. He has a whole different slate of players than when he left the 49ers. So we can look at his trends and his abilities, but he's walking into a, I don't want to say completely new situation. It's a familiar situation, but it's very different than his last stint there.
It certainly is. And this 49ers team this defense in particular that he's inheriting, 29th in the NFL in scoring and points allowed last year, 30th in points per drive. And they were, from a DVOA perspective, I believe they were in the mid 20s in rushing defense. And so in terms of telling on themselves, like, they went defense in this draft.
Oh, yeah.
And they added multiple defensive linemen, and Alfred Collins broke the dam yesterday.
Broke the dam yesterday. Yes,
the second round pick to sign, because honestly, EJ, they need him. They need him to start. and there's not a lot of second round picks that teams are depending on to start. So tell me, when you look at this 49ers team, and I mean this is going to sound like a loaded question, but I mean it genuinely. I look at the 49ers, who struggled mightily in run defense and struggled in a lot of categories on defense. They have Fred Warner, who was hurt last year, coming back from, a stress fracture he played with. Unbelievable player. Yep. Dre Greenlaw is not coming back. And there's no other linebacker coming through that door that's even close to Dre Greenlaw, as far as I can see. The cornerbacks, ESPN had their top 10 cornerback list out today. Diamador Lenore had votes, but was not an honorable mention or top 10. He's the only 49er cornerback that received any votes. There's some question marks there. Safeties, Malik Mustafa, ACL injury, may not, don't know when he's going to be available. Jair Brown, like, question marks there. And then you've got the defensive line, and you've got two rookies that you're really at the defensive tackle. That might be the worst defensive tackle room, by my estimation, in the NFL. Like, it's in the conversation depending on how those rookies perform, unless you're a big Jordan Elliott, Kevin Givens fan, whatever.
Right.
So tell me why is the defense going to make a big step forward for the 49ers? What am I missing?
Well, I think all the things you said are true. And I don't think any of that is, with green and blue glasses, right? That is, yes, you're looking at a division rival, but all the things you said are true. They're 29th versus the rush EPA, 29th in points allowed. You can't win with that. Again, you can win in the middle of the pack. You can't win being bottom of the barrel with that. I don't care how good your offense is. And the pass defense was 16th. You talked about the defensive backs. Again, teams sort of telling themselves with how they pay people and where they put their money. I have a friend that always says, don't tell me what your policy objectives are. Show me your budget. And it's the same. It's the same with NFL teams. They typically haven't invested. Sometimes they've invested in safety, but they typically haven't invested big dollars in corner, at least big dollars for the league perspective. I'm sure the average fan thinks those salaries are all pretty big, but the defensive line really fell apart and they couldn't stop the run. And when you just flat out cannot set an edge and stop the run, you're going to have a long day. I don't care what level of football you play at. I was talking to Matt Bowen a few years ago. He said, I don't care if it's high school, college, D3, like the NFL. If you can't set the edge and stop the run, teams are going to be able to impose their will, and you're not going to be able to get them off the field. They're going to be able to continue drives, and we saw that with the 49ers. So while the defensive tackle room was, I will say, bereft of talent, certainly on the inside, the good news for them is I like Alfred Collins. Actually, I love Alfred Collins. He was one of my gems this year for Bootleg. And Michael Williams is a good run defender. Now, there's a lot of questions about taking a guy that high at number 11 for run defense. He starts with a base at run defense, and they're betting that he can develop into a pass rusher because of his traits, but they're both really good against the run. And then CJ West is a guy that we got to interview at the Shrine Bowl that I really, really like. Defensive tackle out of Indiana. And again, people are sort of projecting some pass rush, and I'm like, you're missing the forest for the trees. CJ is not your pass rush guy. He has some of that ability, and he believes he can do it, but right now he will mess stuff up against the run. So if you take Collins and then you add CJ and, Michael, again, is a stout run defender right now with that experience, you've infused a bunch of talent. And again, the 49ers are kind of telling on themselves going, well, we all know that we sucked at running, but we're going to put in one chip. We're going to put in two chips. We're going to put in our first round pick. Like they're pushing the chips in the middle of the table to say that's not going to happen again. And bringing Salah back, the defense, as you talk about it, it is not loaded with stars. It has Fred Warner, who is one of the greatest players in the NFL at his position. And then you got Bosa, who, again, as long as he's healthy, is a very dangerous guy, but he needs help. He can't be the only guy. You can't have any unit in the NFL where one guy is the guy, right? Because the opposition is going to plan for that, and they can largely neutralize a single player. The problem is when you add multiple threats, and Seahawks have been really good at doing this in bringing in different types along the defensive line and playing them in different roles and moving them around a lot. And that makes them very much harder to deal with. 49ers are going to return to some of that with talent, but they're also going to return to that consistency I talked about under Salah. Again, I don't think this is going to be a top-ranked defense by any stretch, but I would be very surprised with the infusion of talent if it was a bottom-ranked scoring defense or a bottom-ranked run defense again. I think the run defense will probably go up at least 10 points. That might sound like high praise, but that would only be 19th in the NFL. That's still below half. Scoring defense, I bet they'll be in the top 20. And again, that doesn't sound great, but you're approaching that territory that if the offense rebounds, which is a whole nother set of questions that we can talk about, they could return to that more balanced style of football that has been winning football for them over the past 4 or 5 years.
We will definitely talk about the Seahawks here in just a second. Everyone's dying to hear about Seahawks stuff.
Yeah, like enough about the guys we play. I
think it's pretty critical. We don't get a chance to talk to people across the league as often. And so good to check in with EJ Snyder of Bootleg Football here. And so briefly on the offensive side for the 49ers, there seems to be a general expectation that they're going to have a big step forward. I'm curious, when you look at that group, you look at Trent Williams. I mean, Dominic Pooney was a great pick last year. There's still some question marks. They lose Aaron Banks. See if Ben Barch is going to be a good replacement there. Then you've got Christian McCaffrey, I think is probably the biggest question mark of them all. I'm curious, EJ. I will say there's two things I'd love to hear from you on. One is Christian McCaffrey going to be Christian McCaffrey again, based on your expectations? And two, that wide receiver room. Brandon Ayuk, ACL, MCL, may start the season on PUP. Demarcus Robinson may be suspended for some period of time. You've got Ricky Pearsall. Now Juwan Jennings wants to be traded or getting a contract extension. That receiver room, from my perspective, I think if I looked at ESPN's rankings, I don't think there's a single player in that receiver room that received even a vote of being a top 10. That used to be a strength of that group. So I'm wondering what you think of that group and what you think about Christian McCaffrey.
Well, we'll start with McCaffrey. If he's on the field, yes, he's going to be Christian McCaffrey, but that if is a huge one. And when he's a dominant player. When he is on the field, they are a different team. And defense is absolutely key on CMC. He is the straw that stirs the drink when he's on the field. People talk about all the other stars they either have had or still have on offense, but make no mistake, if CMC is on the field, they're running their offense through him and people are trying to stop him because he's a dominant player. He's got injuries, and injuries have always been the thing. But the thing is, if he is out there, he's one of those guys that is 100% full go. Like, he trains so incredibly hard in the off season. And if he's there, he is going to contribute and make a difference. The question is if, because when he's not there, they're a different team, and it's on off with him. It's a toggle switch. It's not like, I know he plays with injuries. I'm not saying he's not tough. That's not the thing. Usually his injuries are the kind that you can't play through. And so he is either there or he's not. He's not one of those guys we see out there and we're like, well, he played hurt for 80% of the season, so he can't. He's not that guy. He's either full go or he's off the field. If he's full go, they're a different team. If he's off the field, they have to lean on their backup running back room, which they've done very successfully. I would say more successfully than almost any team in the NFL over the past 3 or 4 years. You always see the 49ers go 3, 4 deep, and guys that you haven't heard of are out there getting 100-yard games. And they just, Kyle did it. His dad did it. It is the Shanahan system. They have always propped up running backs with, I'm not going to say limited, I'm going to say very specific skill sets and leverage them. And we see those guys now in the draft and we tab them. We're like, this is a Shanahan outside zone running back. If he ends up in one of those systems, he's going to be great. If he doesn't, he might be kind of limited because he has the skills they need. So I think they'll be okay. It's a little bit like the Alaric Jackson conversation we had earlier. If CMC is there, he's great. If he's not there, you can't replace him fully. You're not going to drop off. They do have a very good backup history with running backs. To the wide receivers, it is a very different room. It is a younger room for sure. Ayuk's health availability is a huge question. And this kind of, we're establishing a theme here about the 49ers, like highly paid stars. If they're available, they're amazing. If they're not, and that's Trent, Kittle's been, for the most part, pretty solid injury-wise, but Trent, CMC, Fred Warner, it goes on and on. Bosa, same thing, right? High impact, high dollar, but if they're not there, a large percentage of your salary cap is on the trading table. That's not great. So they're really going to be leaning on the young guys. The Juwan Jennings thing is a bit of a curveball because I think he's very underrated. He fits very well in their system. I don't know that he would play a starring role on another team, and he doesn't even have a starring role in this team, but he is deadly important. Third and Juwan is not just a joke. I mean, that is rooted in truth, and I think he does more in that offense than people give him credit for. Ricky Pearsall, I was super duper high on, and I love the fit. With San Francisco, obviously was, injured in the offseason before last year started, did come back, played all right, but now he's got that rookie season out of his belt. Let's see whether or not there's any kind of sophomore bump, sophomore slump. We don't really know. Demarcus Robinson, again, if steady player, not necessarily a needle mover, I think a good guy to have in your wide receiver room. They might not have that. And then the guy I'd be most excited about that they drafted this year is Jordan Watkins out of Ole Miss, who I think was highly underrated and will be very productive in their system. But he is a rookie, and you're talking about a guy that's currently probably wide receiver 5 or 6 on their depth chart. So if you're talking about that guy as being an important or integral role on offense, yeah, the wide receiver room is not the strongest. Again, if Ayuk's healthy, Juwan Jennings gets settled, and Ricky Pearsall doesn't slump. Again, I said if, and they're starting 3 wide receivers. That should tell you something. There are some players behind them as well that I think are good, but is this going to be a dominating? Again, is this going to be like a truck wide receiver room that pulls the team like it used to necessarily? I don't think it will be. Can it contribute in the system? Yeah. Again, in a Shanahan offense, you have to run certain receivers, have to run certain routes, and they have to win. They have to run, you have to run the backside dig in the Shanahan offense, and you have to win. And if they have that player and he does win, that offense moves. We've seen it, over and over and over again. If they don't have that player, it's not that they stall, but they are going to have stats that are a little bit more like the ones you listed for Stafford, more 3 and outs, more stalled drives. It reminds me a little bit of when Aaron Rodgers was in Green Bay with Devontae. They needed a third down. He would look out, say, hey, play the leverage. I'll throw you a back shoulder fade. We're getting the third down. We get to keep going. Like we get another set of downs. 49ers had that for a while from their wide receiver room in different players. It wasn't just one dominant player that could always do it, but everybody played their role very well. That's why I really like Juwan Jennings in that offense. And now they might have that depending on health, depending on contract status, but they might not. So we'll probably see some adjustments. I don't think they'll probably start super hot, but by the end of the year, if everybody's healthy, I like the top 3 or 4 options in that wide receiver room.
EJ, if I was to ask you across the NFC West, you can pick one unit, offense or defense, Cardinals offense, Cardinals defense, 49, you get it.
Oh, one side of the ball.
One side of the ball that's going to finish top 5 in the NFL. One unit across the NFC West. Which do you think is the best bet to be a top 5 unit across the NFC West?
I would go Hawks defense.
I think that's a good answer.
Yeah, I think that's the safest bet in the division.
I think it's the safest bet. So tell me, when we look at this, if I told you that top 5 defenses historically win over 11 games, teams that have a top 5 defense, teams that have a top 10 defense win over 10 games. The Seahawks last year won 10 games in Mike McDonald's first season with all sorts of things not going well.
Yep.
Why are they a 7.5 over under in Vegas?
I think there's a lot of question about the change on the offensive side of the ball. I don't think there's any question on defense. With Mike Mack there, with another year of assembling talent, the sort of early mind meld that he's shown with John Schneider, those two are definitely vibing on getting the same type of players in. So there's not a fight there or a struggle there. I don't think there's any questions about the defense. It was good, very good in the first year, despite a lot of things, including missing some pass rush early on. And, got very good by the end of the year. Nobody really wanted to play the Hawks defense down the stretch. The offense is the question mark, right? Can Sam Darnold replicate that success? I think there's reasons to both believe that and to disbelieve that, right? The offensive line has to get their act together, for lack of a better term. Like
there might be a better term there, EJ.
There is a better term, but I first time on the show, we'll keep it PG. They were objectively horrible. They gave up the most pressures in the NFL by far, especially when you're talking about the interior trio last season. We're talking about 40% pressure rate, right? Almost, you're approaching 1 out of every 2 plays gets blown up. Like nobody can operate in those conditions. And a lot of people are looking at Sam Darnold and his history with pressure and saying, ooh, if that doesn't improve and improve a good bit, I'm not talking about going from 29th to 20th. Like, it has to be middle of the pack or better. And if it is, then Sam Darnold really opens up, especially in a Kingsbury offense, right? He can turn his back to the defense. He can get the deep play action shots, and he is well-versed. That is his superpower as a quarterback. But in order to do that, you have to have an offensive line. And I think there are a lot of question marks there, just like all the question marks we brought up with all the other teams. That is the question that people are asking about the Seahawks. Well, yeah, they were terrible last year. And well, they did a bunch of things to address that, but are those things going to work? The answer is nobody knows. We hope so, as Hawks watchers, that they will have a better than average pass protection unit, and we will get to see Sam do what Sam does. Because if not, it's going to be a disaster. And I think that's what people are worried about. I don't necessarily share those worries, but that is absolutely what people are worried about. Because the defensive side, Mike's background, the players they have in-house, the draft resources they've thrown into it and continue to throw into it over the past 3 years. Everybody's like, no, defense is going to be good. They got to score some points. And there have been a lot of changes. New offensive coordinator, new quarterback. Anytime there's that and some questions about, hey, the building block, is it stable? The offensive line, can we stand everything on this? That's probably why people are, I would say, underrating the Hawks right now. I certainly would call 7.5 and underrating of where I think Seattle will finish.
You talk about being at the Senior Bowl. I was there, as I mentioned, the first time this year. Gray Zabel put on quite a show there, as well as at the Combine. Dominic Pooney came in last year and was one of the few rookie offensive linemen don't generally stand out. Dominic Pooney managed to do that last year with the 49ers. Clint Kubiak comes to Seattle with John Benton, who was with Kyle Shanahan initially. They've been able to kind of disguise or at least cover up some of the weaknesses of offensive linemen in the past. Talk to me about 2 guys in particular, Gray Zabel and Olu Oluwatimi. What do you see from those 2 players? What do you expect from those 2 players?
I'll start with Zabel. I was on the field in Indianapolis with him at the Combine. It was my first experience watching him in person after watching quite a bit of tape. I got to be honest, I watched him for about 5 minutes. I focused in on him like a hawk. I was like, all right, I need to dial this in and make sure what I think I've seen on tape is real. I watched him for about 5 minutes and went, he's good. He's going to be fine. Again, we talked a lot about other rookies already in this podcast and where they go and landing spot being very important. Gray Zabel was one of the few players I looked at and said, I don't really care. I don't care whether he goes to a man system. I don't care whether he goes to zone system. I don't care whether they play him at center or guard. They could even play him at tackle. Like, he has his limitations there. I don't think that's going to be his NFL spot, but in a pinch, in a sort of Joe Tooney situation, could you put him out there? Yeah. He played 4 years of tackle at South Dakota State or North Dakota State. So, I watched him for the way he moves, his demeanor. I was there for his podium session as well, in the media center. The way he talks, he's just wired the right way. Like, you want offensive linemen to be wired a certain way. He's wired the right way. They turn him out the right way in that program, and he is another one. And then you watch physical skills for, again, some guys you can watch for like 2 or 3 minutes after you've watched their tape. You see him move in person, see him do some different things, and you're like, no, he's good. He's got what it takes. That is an NFL offensive lineman. That's what I said about Gray Zabel. So, the fact that we plug him in at guard, I think he's going to play there quickly and well, and I think he will continue that. He's going to be one of those guys that we look back and, everybody says 10-year starter, and 10-year starter is incredibly rare in the NFL.
Yeah.
Like 7 to 8-year starter is really, really, really good. If you pick somebody in the draft and they end up starting for your team for 7 or 8 years, you won. I don't care whether you picked them in the first round or certainly later on down. I think we're going to look back in 7 or 8 years. Gray Zabel's probably still going to be a Seahawk. He's probably still going to be playing very, very well. And we're all going to go, yep, he was that dude. He's just a kind of no surprises guy. Olu, I think, is a much more interesting case. Olu is on my list coming out. I thought he was a steal. I highlighted him again in our summer preview series. The year he came out in the draft, I said, I think this guy should have gone higher. I liked his skill set. He's got to bulk up a little bit, but he is super strong. He is technically very sound coming from that Michigan program. And he moves very well. I think he has potential as a starting 2-way center down the line. That's what I said like a couple of years ago when he came out. Obviously didn't elevate. And the problem with offensive line in general, but certainly interior offensive line as well, is you cannot be good if the guy on your left and the guy on your right are failing all the time, because you start to try to do too much. It is the offensive lineman, just like I said, that wiring, that mentality. They want to help. They want to support. They do not want to get their quarterback hit. And when things are failing to their left or their right, they'll start to lean that way. They'll start to try and like help. And then that limits their effectiveness in their role. Everybody's got to play their role and play it very well. And if that breaks down on the inside of the offensive line, even with one player, like if you're a center and you have a bad guard, I don't care, bad guard on either side. I would argue probably had bad guards on both sides last year. You're just not going to look very good as a unit, because again, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And the standard really for offensive line averageness is perfection, right? We didn't give up any sacks, right? You give up 1 sack, you had a bad day. So you could face 60 pass rushers. You don't typically in a given game. You might face 20 true
unless
ones.
Ryan Grubb is your OC.
True, fair. But if you blow it once, you had a bad game, right? People give up 5-8 sacks on the year. That's one every other game. Those guys are not considered good or top offensive linemen. You give up 4 or 5, which is only one every 4-ish games, and you still are like, that's not elite. You give up 2 sacks and 2 pressures for the entire year. We're talking about 600-700 pass rush snaps. The standard is perfection. And if you go any lower, you can't achieve that without a really strong handshake on the interior offensive line. So I'm super excited for Olu, because he's got Gray Zabel on one side and Christian Haynes I had much higher hopes for. And he's in the right spot. Again, he's one of the few players that I've scouted in the last 5 or 10 years that had every single snap of his college career at the same position. It's pretty rare on an offensive lineman. Usually when you're a freshman, they're trying to figure out, they're moving you around. You come in some game as a sophomore and you play a little bit of center, or you slide over to tackle or whatever. Christian was right down the line. Every single snap he took in college was as a guard. And I thought he would come out of the gate hotter, because again, I didn't think anybody was going to try and move him around because of that. And I was like, he already knows how to play guard. He's super strong. Let's go. Hasn't come out hot, but again, it's a young trio that I think could gel. Again, a lot of question marks there, but I feel more positive than apprehensive about the interior trio for the Hawks this year.
Yeah, you talk about Christian Haynes there. We're talking to EJ Snyder for just a couple more minutes. We've got him. I saw him celebrate when Clint Kubiak got hired. And there was word that the UConn coaches were really happy, because they felt like he's an outside zone specialist, and they didn't run outside zone last year.
Yeah.
And now they will. That is, Clint Kubiak made no hesitation in saying that in his press conference. So,
and it would have been silly if he did.
how much do you think that that's real, that can be a big difference maker for how Christian Haynes shows up?
I think the combination, right? Again, you need the guys next to you. You need the talent before any discussion of scheme or fit or your performance in it, because you have to perform as a unit. But we've seen this with other players, and it's not just young players. It can be especially young players when they get drafted into a situation and it's square peg round hole. Their skill set is not, we see it with like rush linebackers, right? And somebody's like, well, guess what? You're going to cover slot receivers. And they're like, coach, I've literally never done that and I'm not very good at it. And then everybody goes, oh, they're a bust. Well, no, they're doing what they did, but they're being asked to do things that they haven't or didn't. And they're either struggling and learning, or they're just not physically capable of doing it. I think Christian Haynes is probably physically capable of running a sort of more man gap scheme. Like he's built very solidly. Let's again use the PG term. But his experience and the muscle memory, all that muscle memory is about those blocks on movement and zone schemes. And zone blocks are very different. And I think it's a bit of a misnomer that offenses in the NFL are one or the other. Nobody's one or the other. Everybody runs all of it and mixes it together. It's a question of how much, and really in the down moments, we need this 3rd and 4. We got to get 5 yards. What's our go-to run play? What's our identity? People use that word interchangeably. And, Clint, he's going to be his own guy. And which is why I said it would have been silly if he went to the podium and said, oh, I'm going to change it up. I'm a man gap guy now. Like everybody would have been like, get out of here. You're not. We know. So I think there is a huge boost for young players when their skill sets align. And we've said it already several times. When a guy gets drafted into a system, like it's either stock up or stock down, right? And you look at certain guys and certain fits, certain teams, certain abilities to develop a position. And you're like, oh, that guy's going to be so perfect there. And then you see other ones and you're like, I'm not sure, like it might fit, but I'm a little worried about that. And when you change a scheme for a young guy and it's a fit, you can see a huge bump from that, just because he's like, now I'm comfortable. And they'll come out and say that afterwards. They always do the good soldier thing in the beginning and say, oh, I can do whatever. I'll do whatever coach tells me. And I'm just here to support the team. And then, it happens with like tackle guard converts, right? And they play him a tackle and they're like, I'm totally comfortable and capable. They look totally uncomfortable. The next year, the team moves them back a guard and they say in their open press conference, I'm so happy I'm back a guard. This is great. Feels like home, right? But they can only say that afterwards. So good to see Christian celebrate with that hire and be that excited. That's half of it, but it's also where I'm not going to say all, but a lot of his muscle memory lies.
EJ, we are almost out of time. I was going to ask you about the Hawks draft. Do you have 30 seconds, 60 seconds to tell us?
No, I'd say we've got another like 5 minutes and then
perfect. Let's talk Seahawks draft. You've already talked about Gray Zabel a little bit. What was your perspective on the young players that they're bringing in to start their first training camp next week?
I love the draft overall. John's been on a bit of a heater last 3 years. There was kind of a drought in the middle. There was the walk through the desert where, what are you doing? And he's hit his sort of early career stride again, where you look at these drafts, you see the fit, you see the value lining up much better than you did, or I did certainly in those middle periods where there's a lot of question marks. But there's some real gems here for me. Gray Zabel was, again, people know I'm a Hawks watcher, that I'm here, that I go to a bunch of games, and that I'm familiar with the team. And they were asking me before the draft, like, who would you draft? And I was like, well, I would draft Gray Zabel, but I don't think they're going to do it because they just haven't, right? They haven't invested in offensive line early. And then they did. And a bunch of people reminded me of that. They're like, they actually did it. I was like, I know. And I'm super excited. Nick Emanwari, I think it very much is going to play a very familiar role from, I'll say, the Ravens defense, which is where Mike Mack came. And, we've seen players in that defense play that role very specifically. The skill set is there. So that's exciting. Elijah Arroyo is I think a health dependent player. He would have gone much earlier than even 50 if his knees were an absolute green check mark. Some teams had questions about that. Obviously the Hawks are comfortable at 50. Great pass catching threat, incredibly smooth. Really like him. Jalen Milroe, biggest lottery chip in the entire draft. And I'm not talking about the Seahawks draft. If you eventually end up with a guy that can start, and I'm not sure he can, but I'm absolutely not sure he can't either. And I think he is doing and saying all the right things right now. And you get him, at 92, you're set. Like, you're playing with house money for 2 or 3 years as an organization because you have a young quarterback who is inexpensive under contract. So we'll see whether that works out. But again, a very worthy gamble to take at 92. I'll skip Riley Mills. I see the fit in the defense, but he wasn't necessarily my favorite. Torrey Horton. Here's my pound the table moment for this draft. Torrey Horton. Torrey Horton is going to be really good. Torrey Horton is a great player that a lot of people forgot about because of circumstance and timing of injury. When he was on the field, he was wildly productive for Colorado State. I love Torrey Horton. He's got return ability. Again, way down in 5 at 166. That is a steal. I'm just here to again.
Can I pause you on him for a second? Why do you love him?
Because he is a very good and polished wide receiver already, and he does many things that professional wide receivers have to do to win. And there is a big distinction there between what wide receivers can and will do in college to win in some systems and what you need to do when you go to the pros. So if you're getting free releases all the time in college, you're not going to get them in the pros. If you are facing, say, 10% press coverage or even less, which actually is not as uncommon as it sounds, it's much more common in college to have those kind of numbers, you're not going to win in the NFL. You're going to face press. And if you can't win against press, or your effectiveness drops a lot against press, you're not going to see a lot of targets as a young receiver. You have to win against press. You have to be an accurate route runner. You got to know how to position your body. You got to have very good hands. You got to be tough. You got to have some speed. Everybody really concentrates on speed with wide receiver. Yeah, that's not an analogy I can use. It's the big shiny thing that everybody pays attention to with wide receiver. It's not necessarily the sort of meat and potatoes. There are lots of wide receivers who are very effective in the NFL who ran 4.56,
yep,
4.62. Like, people go, oh, 4.2, whatever, he's going to be great. No, there's a lot of other things. Torrey Horton, that sort of Venn diagram of his skill set is really wide. It covers a lot of ground, and he was highly productive in college in, I don't want to say pro style because that's a misnomer, in a system that uses a lot of skills that pro receivers need. And when he was on the field, he had 1,000 yards. Like, for the last couple of seasons, he was healthy and on the field, he had 1,000 yards, and he looked good doing it. It wasn't made up production.
If things go well for him, what's the comp?
If things go really well for him, Bobby Trees, Robert Woods. Yeah.
Interesting.
Versatile, can play inside, can play outside, is effective, savvy, is a guy that, like, hey man, we need 9. I need you to go get 9. He'll get you 10. Right. And, very wily receiver, needs to bulk up a little bit physically. He is slight. That's always been the knock. The injury was a question mark, but like, everything else about that guy reminds me of other small wide receivers where everybody's focused on size. And then they go play for the eventual Super Bowl champions and keep killing it. And they're like, oh, I guess that doesn't matter. He was winning that way in college too. I look at Torrey Horton the same way, in terms of he's already winning the ways he needs to win as a pro receiver, and has been for a couple of years in college. That's rare. Again, these guys are developing physically and everything else. Was just talking about Ty Felton, who got drafted in the 3rd round this year. And like, Ty Felton had like 50 yards, I think 300, 500, or 300, 700, and 1100. Like, his progression was super linear. Most times it's not. Torrey hit a high level of production a couple of years ago, and I don't see any reason he won't continue. Very, very pro wide receiver.
Well, EJ, thank you so much. EJ Snyder of Bootleg Football, very generous with your time today. It's been great having you on the show for the first time. Hopefully it won't be the last. Maybe, I don't know if you'll be at Seahawks training camp at all, but if you are, we'll have to connect and shake hands in person.
Yeah, we'll have to see about getting me up there. I was up there a couple of years ago. I didn't get up last year because we were doing some traveling, but yeah, maybe we should talk about that. And I would love to come back on the show. It's been a pleasure. It's always great working with people that know their teams as well as you do, and it's a lot of fun. Seahawks are I don't even want to say a guilty pleasure. Seahawks are just a pleasure for me to talk about. They're not my team, and that in some ways frees me to talk about them and have even more fun with it. So great opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Awesome stuff from EJ Snyder. Thank you so much. Make sure you check him out at Football EJ, as well as on Bootleg Football. Thanks so much, EJ, for coming on.
Absolutely.
All right, that was EJ Snyder. Great stuff from EJ as always. I know we spent a lot of time outside of the Seahawks, partially because like it's great to have someone who's a generalist. Like when I've had Robert Mays on, when I've had Derek Klass on, I think it's really important to get a perspective about some of these other teams that are going to be in the Seahawks way or not when we're doing this. And as I said before, if you don't check out Bootleg Football, if you haven't checked them out, you should. It's fantastic stuff. I think they do great work, he and Brett, and really enjoy their content. So make sure you do that. We do have a couple super chats I want to get to. We've got one from John who says, do you think the guarantees for picks will filter down to rounds 3 to 4 years to come if they do it for all second rounders? Houston started the domino effect. So John's referring to the second round pick guarantees and how we saw that, Houston signed their first, what was the second pick of the second round to a fully guaranteed deal. And then the Cleveland Browns signed their first pick of the second round to a fully guaranteed deal. Yesterday, we saw Alfred Collins of the 49ers sign a non-fully guaranteed deal. I think he's the 43rd pick overall, middle of the second round. So I don't believe that we're going to see fully guaranteed deals for third and fourth round picks in future years, maybe well down the line. If you want to project the curve forward, obviously second round picks, every one of them is going to get a higher guarantee this year than they got last year. There's going to be some number of picks next year that is greater than 2 that will get a fully guaranteed deal. I don't expect Nick Emanwari to get a fully guaranteed deal. If you look at, I was hoping to have a chance to do this before the show, but I didn't have time. If you look at the 43rd pick last year, the 49ers gave Alfred Collins 10% higher guarantees than I think he got maybe 88% guaranteed. It was 78% for the 43rd pick last year. So you can kind of probably project out from either end of that to the 50th pick where Arroyo is picked, Elijah Arroyo, and the 33rd pick to see where the Seahawks are going to end up on guarantees for their 2 draft picks. So no, I eventually maybe, but I don't think third and fourth round picks for 5 years are going to be, talking about full guarantees. All right, next question comes from David Galt. Hypothetical here that the Hawks keep Noah Fant. What challenge would having 2 speedy tight ends pose to defenses? Any comps for other teams, current or past, that have had a pair of top speed tight ends? Thanks for the question, David. So, I don't know that you're going to have Noah Fant and Elijah Arroyo on the field at the same time. One of them would have to take a pretty meaningful step forward as a blocker and probably change their composition of what kind of player they are. Generally, if you're going to have multiple tight ends on the field, one of them is going to be an inline blocker that, is going to be someone that you can count on for that contribution. And so I just, I don't see it happening. The reason that there aren't a lot of comps of other teams doing something like that is because that's just not done generally when you're designing offenses. There are roles that tight ends play, and Fant and Arroyo are a little bit overlapping in that regard. They're going to be split out. They're going to be running routes more often than they're going to be kept in to block. When they are asked to block, it's going to be, getting an angle and an edge on a player more than it's going to be overpowering them. So yeah, I don't know that I see those 2 on the field together very often. I could be wrong, but that's my current expectation. All right, folks. Thank you to everybody for tuning in today. If you haven't already given the show a like and click subscribe, please do. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., Abe Lucas, your starting right tackle for the Seahawks, will join the show. He and I will catch up ahead of training camp, which will be really fun. So make sure you are with us tomorrow for that conversation. And then we are going to be counting down to training camp next week. I'll be away this weekend, so I don't know exactly what my schedule will be for when I go live. There might be some days I don't go live this weekend. We will see. So make sure you've got the bell clicked to get notified when I go live and when there's any other content coming. Also go to patreon.com/hawkblogger, sign up there, get access to ad-free audio of this show every day, as well as the Discord channel where there's awesome conversation going on every day as well, in between shows, during shows, and get verified at hbtix.com, hbtix.com. The best place to go to buy Seahawks tickets. Wouldn't it be funny if you could buy a Seahawks fan? Buy Seahawks tickets from Seahawks fans and sell Seahawks tickets, most importantly, to Seahawks fans. Let's protect Lumen Field and the home field advantage that we've established by making sure that you're selling your tickets to a Seahawks fan and not just some rando like a 49er fan for opening game. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your Thursday. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I'm Brian Nemhauser. Have a great rest of your day.